Hello, my name is Dan Cousins. Thank you so much for joining us here today for the webinar. We've got a great discussion lined up for you. Really glad to have you here. Thanks for joining in the middle of the day. We're looking forward to speaking about executive function, telling you all about it, how it works, and how our executive function coaching works. First, I'm just going to say a couple of words about Bespoke Education, what the company is, what kinds of services we provide, so you have an understanding of how this work fits into the rest of what we do. We're just going to share our website. We are a multi-service provider in the educational space, accompanying your child through his or her educational journey, really from the start all the way to the end. That service breaks down into many different forms. We do a lot of test preparation. That's where we got our start, working on the SAT and the ACT and all the other tests. There's mock testing involved. We really know those tests inside and out, the content and the strategy. So let us know if that's something that you're interested in. We do college advising for getting your student into college, all sorts of things, working on the essay, working on the list, working on the admissions process itself, what kinds of classes or extracurriculars you might want to think about taking, and even tailoring applications to specific schools. We do a program called Bespoke Education Access, which is really key to our mission, very close to our hearts here at Bespoke. Not only doing one-on-one tutoring, but doing partnerships with schools, with charter schools, private schools, and even non-school organizations, where we're working on getting our expertise and our mastery into the minds of those who typically can't afford those services. So if that's something that you or an organization that you work with might be interested, please do let us know. Lastly, and for today, we really just know tutoring. We've been doing it for so long. We work on academic performance, which means helping students at every stage of their schoolwork. What do they need to do better, to do just a little bit more for enrichment, for remediation, all of that kind of work. And the cornerstone of all of it is what we're here to discuss today, the executive function piece. How do we get done what we need to get done? And how do we work with students to help them learn that side of what they need to learn? So without further ado, I'm going to welcome our panelists. I'm joined today by Nadia Diamond and by Dr. Jacqueline Reyna. They're my colleagues of long standing. It's my pleasure to have them here. Hi, Nadia. Hi, Dr. Jacqueline Reyna. It's great to see you. If we can start with just a few words from you about your background in education and what you're working on with your students and here at Bespoke these days, that would be really great. Nadia, let's go with you first, please.
Great. Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here, and it's great to see so many people in the audience today virtually. So I've been at Bespoke for several years now. I started doing mainly test prep at Bespoke, the SSAT for middle school or high school entrance, the SAT and ACT for college, but I've since really moved outward and done academic writing coaching, college essay support, and now our executive functioning wing. Before I got to Bespoke, I worked in the Center for Teaching and Learning at Princeton University for 2.5 years, where I was actually working one-on-one with undergraduates on some of the very skills we will be talking about today. So I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Dr. Reyna?
Thank you, Dan. I'm also happy to be here this afternoon. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have a practice here in the city. I work with students in elementary school, middle school, high school, college also. And most of the work I do is what's called educational evaluations or psychoeducational evaluations. And I've been doing that for almost 20 years, which out loud sounds a long time. So I've been in this field doing this good work. And I've been partnering in various capabilities with Bespoke. So really excited to be doing some great work around training, program development, things of that sort. And I'm also a director of a non-for-profit in the Westchester area. So really happy to be with you all today.
Thank you so much. Just a couple words about myself. I started out tutoring in 2006 in New York City. I basically done all of it. The test prep, I found a specific niche working on students with their homework. And so this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm not tutoring so much these days, but I am working on what I call tutoring the tutors, sharing the expertise that I've learned over all of these years with the rest of the team that we've built here. And that's a big piece of the cohesion, of our team and of our work that we're going to share with you today. So what are we going to talk about today? Actually, before I say that, a couple of logistics. We have a quick survey. Please fill it out. It's just going to give us a sense of who is here, and we can tailor a few things to specific age groups if we see any trend there. Also, this is a live webinar. We're all here at our computers to speak with you. So if you've got questions, please do ask them. We will respond to them. We'll try to roll it into our remarks as we go along. And there's also time set aside at the end for us to cover any questions that we don't get to. So you've got two options. There's a Q&A that's seen by everybody. And so if you feel free, please do put your questions there because it contributes to the sense of community that we're going for in the webinar. But you can also chat us questions if there's something more private that you'd like to just ask to the panelists. So you've got both of those. Please, as I said before, ask the questions when they come up because we'll try to respond to them as we go. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we are going to answer this question. What is executive function? That's the first piece of our remarks. Second thing, as we carry on, we are going to talk about kind of how we have developed our executive function work and a practical model, because executive function is a lot of things, as you'll see today, but having a model that you can use to understand it and that you can use to understand what's going on with your student or to answer some of the questions that you've got is really helpful, and it's really helped us. So we're going to share that. And then lastly, we're going to share some of the details of our executive function coaching service, so you know how it works and also how that relates to our recommendations for supporting students with their executive function work, because that's something that if you're here, you may be curious about. So bringing some practical advice to you as it reflects in the way that we deliver this service is going to be really helpful. So to begin, let's go for this kind of blanket question. What is executive function? Dr. Reyna, I'm going to ask you first. What is executive function? How do you understand it in your professional role?
Sure. So in my practice, it's quite common that parents might ask about what is executive functioning? Is this an area that my child has challenges in or strengths in? It definitely is a word, I think, that is very kind of buzzy right now within education. So I think it's great that we get some time to speak about it. And I like to boil the concepts down to some simple things, right? So if we're thinking about EF or executive functioning skills, it's really a set of processes that have to do with your child or adolescence or your ability to manage yourself, your resources to achieve a goal, right? And that's what we're doing all the time. Us as panelists, that's what we're doing right now to give you the best webinar we can this afternoon, right? So as we're thinking about these things, the term I find executive functioning sounds big, and really what it is this umbrella term for many neurologically based skills that involve both mental control and self-regulation. So some of the common skills that we think about are planning, organizing, time management, initiating, problem solving. These are the big ones that kind of bubble to the surface, but there are other skills that are related to this. The idea of being flexible, the idea of working memory, controlling one's emotions, being able to control impulses, things of that sort. So it really is a host of these skills that roll up into the word executive functioning. But at the bottom line, these are skills that we're using every day in our learning, in our work, in managing day-to-day skills and tasks. And so it's lovely to see we've got from kindergarten through graduate school on, parents on the line. So you could all be envisioning, depending on where your child is, how the growth has developed, right? And so we see these skills develop very early in the beginning of infancy, right? All the way through the development of young childhood, adolescence, and still even into early adulthood. And it's as these skills develop, we see that in the very beginning phases of life, scaffolding really helps, right? So, and if we're to think all the way back to your kids in their kind of toddler, going off to kindergarten years, it's within play that a lot of these skills develop, right? Because within playtime, children get to socialize and to start using language and their early cognition skills. And this is where we're starting to see the development all the way into elementary school. And in elementary school, there's a great job of this kind of scaffolding and holding students together and giving them some of these tools that hopefully the child then takes to middle school and high school. And that's why when we were thinking about this model, we're really kind of thinking about our middle school students, our high school students, because sometimes what we see is this is the time where it might be a challenge, because as children progress through each grade, right, what we're seeing is they're more responsible, more self-reliant on their ability to execute against the academic work. And so in our model, we focus a lot on middle school and high school students. But I think the bottom line, when I think about executive functioning, it's a skill behind the ability to execute what a child knows. That's to me the big takeaway.
And there's a key here. As we looked at this, there's a lot of research that's been done on when in a child's development these skills come online. So it's really important to be able to distinguish between what is a high expectation of your child or of any student and what is an unreasonable expectation. For example, we wouldn't ask a kindergartner to plan, research, and write a 5-page paper, nor should we ask a 4th grader or maybe even a 5th grader. They're certainly not going to be able to do that. Most middle schoolers still need a lot of guidance and support to do that work. So having an understanding of when these skills come online is really key. Nadia, how about for you? What does executive function mean to you in your professional role?
I think the phrase that kind of comes to my mind first for executive functioning is that it's the ability to get things done, get them done well, and get them done in a timely manner. And so when I think about those 3 elements, there are a lot of different factors that we'll dive into in a little bit that affect a student's ability to do that. And what's been interesting over the past several years at Bespoke is that I started with test prep. I moved into academic subject tutoring, homework help, writing assistance. And even though any of those might have been the official banner under which I worked with the student, inevitably at some point, I would notice that a student was struggling with an element of executive functioning. And so I would try and work in some skills, tools, strategies to encourage the student's self-awareness to be able to address that ability to foster executive functioning. And I think what has stood out to me, in part because of my own experience too, that executive functioning happens in our brains, our decision-making process, how we prioritize, what motivates us. It's not as simple as, as for our toddlers, putting a purple block in the purple pile or the square block in the square hole. That's externalized. A lot of executive functioning is in our heads. And that means that for teachers, educators, coaches, parents, it's really hard to see how your student is doing with that until you see kind of further down the academic line. If they start failing tests or not turning their homework in, that's usually when we find out about a struggle with executive functioning. But I think what's interesting is that, we're not necessarily having classes in elementary school and middle school that are fully devoted to how to take notes effectively, how to study for final exams, how to write papers. Teachers are trying to incorporate bits of this into their content, but all of these executive functioning skills end up being kind of an invisible curriculum that's learned alongside the content. And so I think, with my tutoring and coaching, I see that that's something that we're kind of always juggling between, and what I'm excited about for executive function coaching, because it gives us the time and space to really dive into these sort of hidden skills that students may not be aware of at this point.
I love that phrase, the invisible curriculum. I think it's very true. We're going to get into that much more today as we go on. First, Nadia, do you have any example of kind of the explicit request that you got from a family, but then what you found as you were working with the student was going on implicitly? Like, what was the cause of the reason that the family had called you in the first place?
Yes, I would say what is a kind of clear example of that was this spring I was called in to work with a 6th grader who, midway through spring semester got his report cards back, and he wasn't doing well in math. And so I was called in initially, and again, under the official banner of academic support, to work with him on his algebra, or pre-algebra class. And he'd bounced around different schools, so we thought maybe it was knowledge gaps in the curriculum. And when I started working with him on the math, I discovered that he actually had a good grounding on the different concepts. The kicker was that when the tests came around, and I would say, oh, let's study for your math test, and we would dive into reviewing his notes, he had little to no notes on his page on the PowerPoint printouts that his teacher had distributed. He hadn't been taking notes. And so that really inhibited his ability to study effectively for the test. And so it had been this kind of gap that was causing his lower grades, and not necessarily a question of content.
That's very interesting. And I think that ties back to this invisible curriculum. If there had been some learning about note-taking or about what it even means to study, that's something we see all the time as students are asked, study for your test, and they don't actually know what that means or how to do it. And so we get back to this idea of, let's say we can define executive function very broadly as the how to learn a component of what teachers mean when they say you have to learn how to learn. It's all of the pieces that go into that, how to structure your time, how to structure your mind, how to make that reflected in the way that you do things, the way that you get things done. It's all of those things. And it's still somewhat confusing. So what we're going to segue to now is really presenting a very clear model, our functional model that we've used in training our coaches and in talking about this with the families and the students that we work with. Because it is important to talk with them about what we're working on, not just go in and do the work. We're going to get to that metacognitive aspect in a moment as well. So what we've done with the model, and Dr. Reyna is going to talk us through it in just a moment, is really focused on what our coaches can work on with students in a limited amount of time. Executive function is very broad. It has to do with impulse control. It has to do with emotions as well. We're a tutoring company. We're not working on those pieces of it, but it also has to do with habits, with behaviors, with learned responses to sets of information. That's the sort of thing that we know so well. So that's what we're here to work on with students, especially in the academic context. So Dr. Reyna, can you please talk us through the functional model that we've built for us to grapple with what is executive function and how can we work on it with our students?
Absolutely. When Dan and I started working together, and the idea of, okay, we've been doing this work, as Nadia had mentioned, right? She's been doing this work, but it was not as formalized, and that in almost all interactions, there was kind of threads of this. And the tutors were working on it, but how do we formalize it in a way where we hold true to the bespoke values, right? Where the experience is customized, it's individualized. Tutors, our coaches now, are meeting the student where they are. How do we hold on to those values, but also be flexible, but also have then some form to this, some language, as Dan said, to speak with families, to speak with the student, so we really understand what are the areas or what we like to call the working skills that we're going to work on when we're really focusing on executive functioning. So Dan, you're pulling that slide up. That is great.
It's up.
Awesome. There it is. Beautiful, beautiful. So here is our practical model. You see there are 5 what we call working skills, and there are 2 what we call foundational skills. I'm just going to kind of walk you through these briefly. We can answer questions towards the end. The one I like to start with first, and again, tutors jump in at any point. There's no specific skill to work on first, but when talking about it, the one that kind of jumps out first, it's often the thing a parent might ask about, or a student might say, hey, I'm having trouble organizing, right? And so what we know is organizing is a skill that really addresses your child or adolescent's ability to effectively impose order in their life. And in their life is a lot of academic tasks that need to happen. So when we're thinking about this skill, Nadia brought up that beautiful, elegant example of identifying, gosh, the student needed help writing notes. You know, this is a skill that kind of rolls underneath that organizing pillar that we have here. And how elegant that example is don't be overwhelmed. These are coachable. These are fixable. It just is sometimes we need the time to understand, well, where is that gap in the child, again, executing the extent of the knowledge that they know. Other kind of things that we think about with organizing are keeping track of what's due. What assignments do I have to do? Turning them in, making sure that the child's space is organized, whether that space is their room or their backpack, or often in this age of technology and the experience with COVID, what does their desktop look like? You know, this can be really important in helping to execute what a child knows. Planning is also a skill that we think of comes ready to mind. It's the process of simply thinking before we do something. We know it involves determining what the goal is, what are the activities that are required for me to achieve the goal, okay? And the skills that are often worked on with students related to this is a checklist for homework, planning out how much time am I going to need to complete this homework. The critical thing of, did I bring the right books home to get the homework done? Or did I go to the library and pull the right articles or information that I needed to execute against the paper? The third working skill is prioritizing, right? The ability to know what is important and when it's important. So it's deciding the must do versus the things I really like to do or I could do, right? Not easy. The importance of what assignments am I going to do first, sequencing actions so that we can complete these larger tasks that we know our students year over year, that things are getting bigger. They're more complex, as they should, as their minds and brains are developing. But sometimes it can be difficult to know the steps to get to a successful completion of a task. Our fourth skill is initiating. And we know there are some kids, they're just awesome self-starters. There's no pausing, they just get to the thing, and there's none of that ugly procrastination word, right? And for others, it's more difficult. For me, it's getting laundry done. But nonetheless, you know, it's important to identify and when that skill is a challenge, and really jumping in to help the child or adolescent know, what are some of the things I can do to get myself to be a better self-starter. Initiating is tough for me. So the things I'm going to do is give myself time when I get home. Give myself 30 minutes before I jump into starting a homework task. Simple behavioral strategies like that can really help students. Lastly, time management is a really important skill. We're thinking about the child's ability to organize their time efficiently. And we all know, as adults in the room, or I'll say, I think that time management is a thing I wrestle with all the time. How do we get all the things done that we have to get done? And how do we do them well, right? And so if we can help students manage their time more efficiently so that they're more effective in their practices, their school practices, their whatever practice that they're working on, and we can get them more efficient if we're helping them with their attention to focus more on the task. And then you know what happens after managing time better? We see this kind of reduction in anxiety, right? Because we're not nervous, we're not going to get the thing done. And so some skills here that we really focus on are, how is a student's ability to understand or estimate how much time it takes to get a task done? Do they understand, you know, that they need to create a schedule with a certain amount of days potentially to study to get to a successful outcome for a test. Breaking things down in meaningful pieces so that they have the time to get things done. And our two foundation skills are metacognition and self-monitoring, or self-regulating is another word you can think about for self-monitoring. But really what we're doing is we want students to be self-regulated learners, right? So a lot of the things you heard Dan saying and Nadia saying, and when we speak together, that's kind of the thing I've been thinking about. And the core to those are these two foundational skills, right? So this concept of metacognition, so thinking about your own thinking and learning, right? Nadia mentioned that earlier, right? It's really kind of all that stuff that happens here in our head. The self-monitoring is that behavioral stuff, right? It's that academic behavior and the social stuff, the strategies to increase my awareness, to change my behavior. And it's these two things together that we're always working on as kind of lifelong learners to really make sure that we can self-regulate our learning experiences. So that's our
Thank you.
model. Sure.
Thanks so much for that clear breakdown. And we've worked with students on all of these or on only some of them. And again, that's where the bespoke aspect of this work comes into play, is it's not that if a student is struggling with executive function, they're struggling with all of them. It could be, but frequently there are certain things that stand out that we start to work on first. Just one more word about this model, just the visual version of it here, is that we've put the foundational skills, the metacognition, and the self-monitoring at the heart. That might imply that everything else emerges from them. That is true, but it's also not true, because the other skills, practicing the working skills, feeds into metacognition and self-monitoring. And when the work is going well and you're supporting a student on this, there's a virtuous cycle there, that work on organizing or planning and talking about that work can feed into a student's metacognition, into their self-monitoring. And a word to the wise for anyone out there, if you've ever had a conversation with your students, I'm a parent of two younger children, so this can sometimes feel crazy to have these conversations. What were you thinking about then? How did you make that decision? Those conversations can feel nuts, but they're a great way to start, because they encourage students to start thinking about their own process. Why did I choose that thing? It also helps them realize that they have agency in making decisions over the way that they are thinking. And that's a key for building this muscle of executive function. Nadia, I'm going to pass it to you now for maybe an example from your work, looking at one or two of these skills. How have you seen them reflected in what you're working on with your students?
Yeah, there's a student I've been working on for a couple of years now. It started with test prep when she was a little fourth grader applying to private middle schools, but now she's in seventh grade and working on writing, because she's at a new school that had a lot of writing classes for the students that she missed out on. And so we're sort of playing catch up with that and making sure that she's comfortable with the formats of what it takes to write a paragraph, the types of research you might need to do to write a 5-paragraph essay, etc. And something I noticed, apart from, again, this is one of those examples where the official banner was writing help. And I quickly discovered, again, per Dr. Reyna's point, that so much is digital, that her school portal was linked to the Google Classroom, and she had to upload her assignments on Google Classroom. And so she'd have several Google documents open at once. Maybe one with an outline, one with a rough draft, one with notes and research. And I noticed that she didn't title any of them. So when she, X'd out of the window to do something else and then went back to her Google Drive homepage, she just had rows and rows of untitled document. And so that ended up adding a lot of time to her work that then made doing the homework more frustrating and tiring, because she had to go through and click 8 or so documents or scroll down a lot on the page to find the one that she wanted to be working on in that moment. And so one of these, and it sounds like such a small baby step, but it really is crucial, that I started asking her as soon as we opened up a new document for her writing work, that she had to give it a title to make it easier for her to find later on, whether it's outline, whether it's research notes, if she wanted to put in a fun asterisk or, emoticon, great, as long as there were enough kind of clues there to help her navigate in the future.
That's such a great example because it's such a small change, but you can see how it resonates with everything else that's happening with that student. From my own experience, there was a student who was kind of sinking under getting his homework on a website and on the Blackboard and in his homework book, and it was just too much. But once we figured out that if every week he could get his assignments into a little sticky on his desktop of his computer, and that it has a little checkbox, and he figured out how to do that. And then he loved finishing the assignments and clicking the checkbox on that sticky. And once we had that system, and I'm not saying that's the right system for every student, but it was the right system for that student. It was a simple change. But once we made that simple change, everything else flowed outwards from there. And he just felt more in control. And that's a big piece of this work. Something we've learned is that executive function is very context dependent. There are people who are great at executive function in one setting, but not in another. So a big part that you want to think about with your student is motivation, is kind of what's going to inspire them to engage in this work. And that's really hard to say what is the motivation for any student, but the more that you can understand your student, what they care about, and then be able to connect these behavioral changes to the thing that motivates them. This is how you're going to get that thing, or how you're going to make it more likely to get that thing. Those are really helpful changes to make. So kind of building on this, how we've turned the model into actual work that we do. Dr. Reyna, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the training that we're doing for our executive function coaches and how that reflects in the work that they do with their students.
Sure. So one of the things that I always like to start out with, because if you don't know this, it's really important that you do as parents, is Bespoke is deeply committed to training their tutors. I've been involved with this organization, as I said earlier, for many years. I've worked with Dan for many years, and consistently year over year is this deep attention to making sure that new hires really understand doing the work, that people who are in the organization have access to training, to professional seminars of various topics. And that is just not common in this industry. And so that's why I just want to take a moment. So certainly when we're thinking about developing a curriculum for our coaches, it was not shocking, the commitment of the organization to have a robust training and to acknowledge that there was real importance. Again, each tutor is individual and they bring their individual self to the session, but we wanted to make sure that there was a core base of knowledge about how to do the work and the vision of the model of the work. So that said, some of the things that were really critical to making sure we're in our curriculum is an understanding of what is executive functioning, an understanding of the model. We talked through those working skills, the foundation skills, a deep understanding of the skills that roll underneath those, strategies that you can use when working with students to build those respective skill areas. Also, an understanding that children learn differently and there are unique differences in each learner. And that's really important to understand, especially when what we really want to make sure is that every coach and every tutor at Bespoke meets the students where they are in their academic learning journey. And that's really when the work can be really wonderful, is because you're meeting a person simply where they are. And you can imagine how that relationship builds when you're committed to that. We also provide training on learning disabilities, attention deficit. And again, the second thing, there's the professional development, which is important, but also the commitment that if you need support when you're out in the fields, that you're going to get that at all times. And again, that's a secondary thing that Bespoke is deeply committed to. So Dan is always available to help coaches and tutors on the fly. So you're not out, not connected. There's always a home base. We are also doing what we call cohort meetings monthly. So the coaches, myself and Dan, get together for an hour a month and just share best practices, help coach through different challenges or scenarios. So really to feel confident that the tutors feel confident about the work that they're doing and that they know that they have a support if they need any help.
Thank you. We really don't want our tutors to feel like they're sort of on their own when they're doing this work, just because we can benefit so much from the experiences of our peers. And for any parents out there thinking about this kind of work, I would advise you to find some other folks to talk to about it, even if that's just calling us up to talk about it, not going for tutoring, not going for executive function coaching, because we've done this work. We've had these conversations so many times. So if you're looking for somebody to bounce something off of, to get a sense, is this normal? Is this not normal? We're a great place to start for those conversations. I want to talk about how to support students with executive function. And this is how we do it with our executive function coaching, but it's also how anyone needs to start if they're going to make this a serious part of the way that they're supporting their students. And it starts with two words. Those words are consistency and dedication. And I'm going to break those down a little bit as we go. One thing is, work on executive function has to be dedicated. It has to be some time that is set aside from the time doing the other work, doing the math homework, writing the paper, doing the research for the history, whatever it is. It has to be set aside from that. And it has to be time where you're kind of going for the bird's eye view. You're not getting in the weeds. You're looking at everything that has to happen. You're making sure you know what it is. You're making sure you're not missing out that English assignment, or you didn't get the homework for math written down, so just forget about it. No, you've got to make sure that you're seeing everything, making sure everything is complete, then starting to make a plan. I mean, it goes in that order. You organize, then you plan, then you prioritize, and then you can start. But until you've done those things, until you realize that you keep pushing off the research for the history paper because the math homework is always more pressing, but then you have 3 days left to research and write the 10-page paper. It's just not going to work. So finding a way to plan, set aside some time for the big thing that is important but not urgent right at the start. Those kinds of decisions can only be made in dedicated time. They're not going to be made when you're just trying to rush and get the math homework done. The other word, as I said, is consistency. Doing this every week. So the way that we do this service is a meeting with a coach early in the week, Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday. That's a time when you have the whole week in front of you. It's a great time to also look back at the week that just happened and make a plan for how the time in the coming week should be spent. Sometimes this time is boring. Sometimes the student says, oh my God, can we just get down to the math homework? And I will resist. I'll say, hang on, we've got to make sure that we're doing the right math homework, or that we're studying a little bit when we do math, because you've got that test next Monday. And that student can just do math homework for the next week and never think about that test. And then they're going to be in a tight spot. The other key here is that the work has to happen before there's a crisis, before there's a fire to put out, before the lab report is due tomorrow. Because in one of those crisis moments, they're never going to learn about the habit that might help them out. They're never going to be willing to change behavior, because in a crisis moment, people don't do that. So having the work working consistently and regularly is a way to make sure that those things do not fall through the cracks. And in any kind of support, making sure that you're doing it both consistently and in a dedicated fashion, separate from the other things you've got to do, is so, so important. Nadia, can you talk about this a little bit more? How have you seen it work well when it is regular, when you're in there week in and week out?
Yeah, actually, there's a parent on the phone on the call right now who I'm smiling about because a lot of what you just talked about, happened with us this spring. Um, and something that is so helpful, especially when the parents are engaged and communicative, is that it's sort of a feedback loop that we're constantly adjusting and customizing for the student, especially when we're introducing brand new ideas. As you mentioned before, Dan, one size doesn't fit all. And so, we might come in with some ideas and maybe we try it for a week or two and it doesn't work so well. So what was so helpful about meeting with the student every week was that we could, try out, okay, let's have your teacher in your last period of your school day check your agenda to make sure that you've written everything down. And then so that you know that your physical agenda has all of the assignments you need to be thinking about tonight. And so we'd propose that idea. I'd speak with the parents in person or over email after the session. And then they might speak with the teacher to set that up. And then the following week, we would say, okay, how did that go? Did anything fall through the cracks? If so, why? And it turns out some things did fall through the cracks because there were things that were posted on Google Classroom that were not mentioned or written down on the Blackboard in school. And so that was a case of, thank goodness we followed up on it, because it turns out that wasn't going to be the final solution for the issue at hand. We had to also set up sort of a habit with the student of going through all of his different classes on Google Classroom to make sure that he wasn't missing anything that had been posted digitally, even if it hadn't been discussed in the class that day.
That's so key. It reminds me of something we talk about in the test preparation side of our work, which is reflective practice. And that practice is great, but what makes practice really great is an opportunity to reflect upon the practice that you did. For example, if students just take mock tests and never think about how they did on the tests that they took, they're not really going to do better. And having these weekly meetings to do the work and then practice doing the work and then talk about how it went when one was doing the work, that's key, because the meeting is happening soon enough after the work happened that it's still fresh for the student. If it's not fresh, or if you're meeting every month or every 6 weeks, too much has happened to really remember it and to be able to remember what one did. And again, as you'll see from my language, all of this is all about the metacognitive aspect. As we work on these workable skills, we're also asking the student to reflect upon what they're doing and what they have done, and then help them use that to build their understanding of what they should be doing into the future. So I want to touch on another piece of how we approach executive function coaching here, which is the assessments that we do with our students. This is a really important part of the work. We want to see some progress, and some assessments are a great way to measure that. But also we found some really cool assessments that help us get at what's going on with our students and help give our tutors some tips on how to approach the work with those students. So Dr. Reyna, can you please talk us through the assessments that we're working with in our executive function coaching?
Absolutely. So when we think of assessments, there are generally two types. One is self-assessments that we're self-reflecting and we're responding to survey questions, right? And the other are more standardized approach. So we have two options that can be utilized. And really what assessments do is they give us data, and from that data, the data is going to give us information, and the information is going to help customize the experience. So the first is something that we created in-house. It is a survey that a parent can take and a child can take, and it's in each of the 5 working skills, in addition to some self-reflection on our foundation skills. We've used this survey for some of our students. And we find that we can use it in different parts. Sometimes we can use it in the early beginning. It helps fine tune where a tutor might want to start. That alone isn't it, right? We're having deep conversations, as Nadia had mentioned earlier, that's the first part. But also what the survey lets us do is kind of a pre and post. So we did this and we saw mom and dad felt this way about the child's organization skills. Johnny also took that and he's getting a self-reflection of where he thinks he falls within this area. And then we customize and then check back in 6 months and say, wow, look at this, we made some improvement. So that's one tool that we built in-house, consistent with our model. But Bespoke has also partnered with Mindprint, which is an assessment. It's an online cognitive assessment. It takes approximately 1 hour. Student does it at home online. It's pretty simple. And Bespoke is offering this to any students who want to participate within this program. And it's an opportunity, as I said, to get a standardized assessment of one's cognitive abilities. And most important from that, this tool gives parents and tutors specific insight on the child and their strengths and weaknesses. So then the coach can take those and really customize the sessions, knowing the individual's unique little cognitive differences, which is really helpful. So again, it's taking the information that we get and really customizing it to the experience.
Mindprint, another reason it's really great, it both gives a sense of one's relative strengths and weaknesses, but it also gives tips to the educator, where basically, if one is working with that student, the Mindprint report that is generated gives some sense of what kinds of learning strategies might be more helpful or less helpful for the student that you're working with. So we see that as a tool to both help our coaches understand their students better and also give them more practical tools with which to connect with their students. Another piece of the work, and this is not just the coaching, but really anytime you're engaging, talking with your student about executive function, trying to make some progress, is the aspect of communication. So Nadia, I would love it if you could tell us a little bit more about what some of that parental communication looks like. What are some of the conversations like that you've had to really stay on the same page and help provide some value even with that piece of the work?
Yeah, sure. I think, well, first, the office you might have seen in the chat, Sarah Schubert has written to people. She is one of our administrators in our office who already offers support over the phone to parents calling with questions and concerns about what their child is going through or what they might need. And so even before I talk to them, Sarah or her colleague Peter has already gone through very extensively kind of what the situation is and what type of work they're looking to do with Bespoke. And so I might get a little bit of information from them about, you know, the general idea of what's expected, but we always start with an introductory phone call or Zoom call in this day and age, where we can, sometimes the student's present, sometimes not, where we can kind of talk a little more about setting the stage, setting expectations, you know, what the family is looking for, and, you know, set up roles. And then once the tutoring starts, usually it would be at the end of the tutoring session if the parent pops into the Zoom frame to have a quick debrief, and or I will send out a recap email. And I think this is standard for tutors generally, that we'll kind of go over what was covered in the session and any follow-up or to-do items. And what is so helpful is when parents are engaged and connected, not only with their student, but also with us about what they're observing in their student. Obviously, they're your child, you know them better than anyone. And so what we as tutors really rely on is having the parents kind of on our team in trying to support the student and making sure that if anything happens at school that gets communicated to the parents, that we're also aware of that, just so that we can kind of fill in all the gaps. But really making sure that all the parties are together and on the same page about what is needed, what the next steps are. That is best accomplished with, weekly email correspondence or a quick touch base at the end of our Zoom call.
There's also a really cool thing that goes on with some prioritization, believe it or not, one of our executive function skills. But if you try to work on all 5 of those workable skills in a given week or in a given session, or ask a student to work on all of them in a given week when they're not working with the tutor, that's not really possible. It's too much for a student to keep in their head at one time. So working on one thing or maybe 2 of them and very specific practical behaviors that they can do, writing down more assignments in their homework book every week, or updating that sticky note that I was talking about beforehand. And the communication between the tutor and the parent goes a really long way in helping set those priorities. So the parent knows what the tutor is focusing on and knows therefore what the student is going to be focusing on and what the parent can keep an eye on as the week goes on. Another neat benefit of this work is that sometimes parents have found and have reported to us that it's impossible for them to get the student to do the thing, but it's easy for somebody else to. And so sometimes that's a neat synergy that we see here is the student, for whatever reason, might be more likely to listen to or to obey the tutor than they would their parents. And if that's something that people are grappling with, getting the student to think more carefully about homework or get them to review their homework before they do it, that's the kind of thing where having a third party can be very, very helpful. So something worth talking about. We have a couple more minutes. I want to answer one question that we had from earlier on, and this is a great time for your questions if you've got them. So please feel free to put them into the chat or into the Q&A. Dr. Reyna, I'm going to pass this one to you. We were asked that if in addition to ADHD or other attention issues, are there other reasons that people might have less developed executive functioning skills?
That's a great question. So when I'm asked that, one of the things I first start off with is that each person is unique and individual, and their cognitive profile is unique and different, and their communication style and their learning style is unique and different, right? And while a diagnosis might let us know that there are certain symptoms or experiences, since that lets us kind of use a label, when we look at everyone, we're all different learners. And so in kind of figuring out why is someone having a weakness in a specific area, that's where that self-reflection and like we developed that survey just right around that. Okay, let's think about, for example, organizing. And let's think about all the components of what organizing looks like. And let's evaluate how do you do with respect to those specific skills. And it's within that, then we can identify, okay, here's an intervention that we can use to assist. So what I like to look at is that, and I think Nadia has really highlighted this in the actual practical work, is regardless of if there are challenges, because we all have unique strengths and weaknesses, they're simple coachable moments. So if someone has a relative weakness related to organizing, we can get to the bottom of it by really understanding. And I have to ask a lot of questions, right? Nadia kind of showed that, like, you really have to pull back the layers of how the person is approaching their work. Second to that, when I think of just general attention, I think about how challenging it is to be a student in this time period, where there is so many competing variables coming in. So one of the first things I share with parents is really look at everything, look at all of the input that is coming into your child or your adolescent or your young adult, and assess that with them. Does it feel comfortable to have information? Nadia shared 3 different ways students are getting stuff. It's not like the old school, it's on a blackboard, you write it down, it's done. No, so it really is talking with your child and understanding, okay, how are they receiving some of the information that they're getting into their world? What feels good and what doesn't? A lot of what we've talked about today also is these conversations that are bigger, not you're doing great because you got an A. We didn't say anything about grades or you're doing great, or how are you doing in the process that might lead you to get an A or a B or whatever feels good for you. What is part of that process for you to execute the stuff that you know at the end of the day. So I hope that's helpful, but I really do encourage that parents are really looking at attention irrespective of diagnosis, but the idea of, and the kindness to be to all of ourselves and our students, of that they are just bombarded, and we have to help them put it in nice, neat packages, and also help our students advocate to say, I'm going to not have my phone during these hours of studying because it's interfering. I'm not going to, have this Instagram thing come up because when I do that, I can't focus on that. A lot of it is really advocating. There's so many social stressors put on students to really make sure that they're keeping up in so many different ways. So I hope that that's a tidbit towards answering that question.
We had a question yesterday about anxiety and sort of the interrelation between executive function and anxiety. And as we've said, we're not therapists and the work is not therapy, but we have seen a correlation between getting a handle on the executive function side of things and a reduction in anxiety. And this happens for me myself when there's too much stuff going on and I sort of don't know where it is and what it all means and what I have to do. Those are anxiety producing moments for me. And if I can fix those things for myself, the anxiety drops. And we've definitely seen this for students as well, where if they have a handle on what they need to do, what's expected of them, what are the extras, what's essential, and they're given some of the tools that they can use to make those decisions and help kind of clear out that clutter, that has a lot of positive effects beyond just getting their homework done. So that's something to think about, as well as the value of considering executive function work for your student with a tutor or not, but really considering it. Is this something that's going on with my kid? Is the problem with math or with English just with math or English, or does it tie back to something else that I could also work on with them? Yeah, the context dependency of this work is really important. And I think that's a great place to start, by listening to your student, seeing what they care about. That's a good indication of kind of where their skills could be, where they are, rather than starting from judgment. Why can't you do this when you can do it in this other place? Start to listen and start to see where these skills are a strength and where they're not a harmful, but something that's getting in their way. And that's going to help you understand more of what's going on and where they might need the support. I think we are out of questions. I'm looking elsewhere. I think that's about it. So we're going to wrap it up. I want to say thank you to Nadia. Thank you to Dr. Reyna. Thank you to all of our attendees, our guests. It's really great to have you here, and thank you for your questions. I just want to say, finally, call us. The calls are free. So those calls are long, they're detailed. We've been answering these kinds of calls and having these kinds of conversations for 20 years. We have a lot of wisdom and a lot of expertise, and we're trying to share it. We just had a call with a client a little bit earlier today, and they said, this is the most helpful conversation that I've had with a tutoring company since I started having these calls. And that's really something we pride ourselves on, and we look forward to sharing it with all of you. So thank you so much for joining us. Please give us a call. Please consider thinking about executive function for your student. It's really important, and it's such a foundation for everything else they're going to be doing in high school and beyond. Have a great day.